Good morning, everybody. We're going to start the Finance Committee meeting today on this March 7th at 8 a.m. So good morning, everybody. We're going to get right into it. If you give me 1 minute, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Everybody can see that?
We can. We're good.
Yes, good. Okay, so we have two agenda items today, and we also have Mr. Bray with us, and we're going to get through this pretty quickly because he has kids that he has to go pick up. So I feel like he's trying to get out of my budget presentation, but that's okay. And I do have to apologize. That should say 25-26 budget. We are past the 24-25, most definitely. So we're going to start off with the bus replacement agenda item. And let me just go back a slide here. I apologize. I think it's doing something goofy here. All right, so we wanted just to talk about, and we do this periodically throughout Finance and Property Committee, talking about our vehicle fleet replacement update. If you remember, the last couple years, we were talking about electric buses. So some of our replacement requests were deferred because we were exploring the possibility of seeing if we could pilot electric buses. And there was grant funding out at the time. So we did some research and we were doing research on the bus depot and infrastructure that was all revolved around, alternative fuel choices for transportation. So we had deferred a couple of the buses that are in our fleet that you can see are very well aged. So we deferred purchase of a 2005 Bluebird. It was they're both 84 passenger buses, and a 2009 Bluebird. The reason that we deferred the purchase when we originally requested to have these replaced is that with the grant for the EV buses, there was a requirement that you had to have buses of a certain year to be able to replace. So these were the two out of the four that we requested at the time that we felt had some additional useful life in them and that we could get through, that we could use them in the event that we would be able to move forward with the EV pilot. Unfortunately, the EV pilot, it just didn't flow through. The funding, the cost of the buses and the amount of funding that we would have received just wouldn't have been fiscally responsible at that time. Also, the infrastructure for us to be forward thinking. We talked about, the configuration of our current bus depot. We did a deep scrub of the township and looked at many alternatives to see if there were other places that we could house our bus depot that would enable us to be future ready for EV. Unfortunately, there's just not many places within the township or the borderline areas that would allow us to do that. So we're coming back because these two buses at this point, our mechanics are giving recommendations that we're past the point of not putting more money into them that makes sense to buy new. So we have a 2005 84 passenger bus. There's significant repairs that will be needed because of structural integrity of the body, and it's 20 years old. The 2009 84 passenger bus, and I will let Nate talk about this a little bit more because I'll be honest with you, I can just read this slide, but if you have questions about what a Caterpillar engine is, I'm not going to be able to tell you. So apparently this bus houses a Caterpillar engine, which I am aware that they no longer manufacture. So we do not have the software to be able to run diagnostics on it when something is wrong. So maintaining it is expensive and it makes it difficult to repair. So I will bounce it over to Mr. Bray to talk about that a little bit more and maybe give some more insight on that.
Sure. So the 2005, as Ms. Green mentioned, is kind of what it is at this point. We have some body rot issues on it that at this point we're no longer comfortable passing it on its safety inspection, on its vehicle safety inspections for getting an inspection sticker put on it. And on the 2009, yes, a Caterpillar engine. Caterpillar stopped making on-road engines years ago at this point. So they are getting more expensive and more challenging to both troubleshoot and get the parts to repair when there are problems with it. The 2009, we at least, as we close out this school year, believe we can continue to use. It's not up against a safety inspection issue, but a part of looking at replacing this one is its age, as well as the fact that we're a little bit concerned as we get closer and closer. We don't want to run into a catastrophic issue with it, where we are down a couple of vehicles because of just the turnaround time on getting anything replaced.
What we're looking for on this is to have immediate replacement. Currently, Mr. Bray is waiting from the dealership to get updated pricing. We anticipate, since our last purchase, estimating off of that where it's going to land between 180 to 200,000. We think it's going to lean closer to the $200,000 based upon inflation in the economy right now per vehicle. And so if we can get that information, and it falls within the parameters that we discussed, we would like to move forward and have motion on the March 18th board meeting, to be able to move forward to purchase, the replacement vehicles for these two. If you remember, Nate, lead time on buses right now.
Lead time right now, they're slightly more optimistic than they were during our last order. So we are hoping that lead time would be roughly 6 months to 12 months. In a worst case, if it starts to turn around on us, that's when we could be looking 18 to 24 in a worst case scenario.
And then, as you see at the bottom, and to Mr. DeFranco's comment at the beginning of this meeting, we anticipate on scheduling a property committee meeting sometime in April. So stay tuned for that date. But at that meeting, we will get into a deeper dive of the full look at the bus fleet replacement schedule, along with the results of the capital assessment plan that formerly Dewey CHA did for us, that will result in a 5-year capital plan. So we will have a bigger conversation, because if you remember, previously when buses were purchased, they were purchased in chunks in a 2-year window. So we're working to try to smooth that out a little bit so that we're not buying 20 buses in 1 year. That's a big heavy lift financially, to do that all at once. So we're seeing if we can smooth that out and start to address that and assign funding to it. But we will have that conversation in a bigger detail in April. But we wanted to come back and revisit these two because, like I said, back in December of 22 is when we were looking to have these replaced. And as you can tell by the years, they're just, it's time. It's a 20 and a little less than 20-year vehicle that has major work that needs to be done with them. Any questions on this? Any comments?
I have a quick question. I want to try and be respectful of Mr. Bray's time. I know you're on a limited schedule, but and so this whole anomaly of the Caterpillar, is that an anomaly that we have this one-off bus, or do we have a lot of weird anomalous buses where they don't quite fit into the fleet? And like by doing this purchase of just 2 buses right now, does this open us up to more anomalies where there might be some sort of systems that are either new to our maintenance department or something that is going to be very different from the rest of the fleet that will create this issue again in 5, 10, 20 years?
Sure, great question. The Caterpillar engine has become a little bit of an anomaly. As we talked a few years ago, we at one point had 4 of those style engines. They did used to be a little bit more common. So we have already replaced those other 3 in the replacement schedule itself. So this one is sort of the one that is left over. As far as replacing these 2, introducing anything else that would be, oddballs in the fleet, no, not really at this point. What we would be looking at purchasing now are pretty much the make and model of engines that just about the entire heavy diesel fleet is currently running. So those, as we look 20 years down the road, could we start to, be phasing out just the current model Cummins diesel engine? Possibly, yes. But at this point, that would kind of get rid of two that are more different from the fleet and introduce two that blend in with the fleet really well.
Thanks. That's great info.
Any other questions? Okay, just want to make sure that if we get the pricing and it falls within the parameters that we discussed, we're okay to move forward to have a motion at the March 18th board meeting. Yep.
I'll say for myself, I'm very supportive. And I just want to be clear and maybe make a comment here. The delay on these for the potential on electric vehicles, the conclusion that we've come to over time is that we do not have the infrastructure in place at the current bus depot. And the grant funding has become limited and challenging. And so that is something that we have now on hold until we can address facilities at a future date.
That is correct.
Okay, great. I just want to make sure, like, if anyone comes back and reviews, like, that we did our full due diligence on the electrical vehicles, and it's just too much of a challenge for Springfield Township today.
100%.
Great. Yeah, I'm supportive.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Nate. You can go pick up the little kids.
Okay, thank you, everybody. We just figured out replacing me, so I can stay on if there are other questions, but otherwise I'll be quietly in the background here.
Thanks, Nate. Okay, we're gonna get into the 25-26 first look at the budget. So again, I repeat myself, but I think this allows everybody on this committee to be able to talk about these slides ad nauseum if they will, at least since I've been here. These are slides that we repeat all through the budget process so that everybody's very clear on what's guiding, what we do when we're building the budget, things that we're thinking about. So these are repeater slides. I won't go through these. Again, the Act 1 index history, this is a repeater slide. I do want to make a notation on the MVPI aid ratio. You'll see that we've been consistent. In 21, 22, we had a little bump that it upticked a little bit. And I'll just remind the group and, if anybody does come back and look at the recording on what the MVPI aid ratio represents. It basically measures the wealth within your township and school district. So you can see what the calculation is at the bottom and how that's derived. But what we kind of just take a look at is there's a range, and it ranges from 0.1500, which signifies, based on the calculation, the wealthiest of school districts, all the way to 0.7259, which is the least wealthy school district. Those are high poverty districts if you have that aid ratio. They're published July 1st of every year. So in July 1, I see that there's a little bit of an uptick where we have been consistently at 0.1500, that we've ticked a little bit to 0.1786, which is not a huge jump. It does not cause for alarm. Dr. Yannicone and I talked about this. Just because it's an outlier and it's different from the other years, I wanted to address it, and it's just something that we'll keep monitoring. It does not mean that numbers have swung so dramatically that we need to have different conversations or review data. But if we start to see that it consistently upticks over the next couple of years, then we'll start to have those conversations on what's driving the change in that aid ratio. So I just wanted to highlight that. And if there's any questions on that, I'd be more than happy to answer that right now before we get into numbers.
So I have one question, considering that it jumped, well, let's just say a quarter, or should I say a quarter of a point. Will that impact our funding any at this point in time?
No.
Okay.
No, because we're still on, if you think about it on a range or a scale, we're still very skewed to the left side of that, towards the wealthiest end. So even looking at when Governor Shapiro gave his state numbers, if we would start to see an impact in funding, that's where we would see it in our allocation. And when you see what our allocation is projected to be based on his budget for 25-26, you will conclude that we are not considered a high need district, that our funding was impacted because we're seeing a little bit of a tick. We're still on the skewed side of being considered a wealthy township and district.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions on this discussion? Okay, budget process timeline. Again, this is nothing new to the members here, just highlighting where we're at in the process. So I'm going to go through revenue assumptions before we take a look at revenues. So this budget was built with a 4% increase. As you know, the Act 1 index was 4%. So it talks about what that equates to in millage. So that's 1.5637 in mills. That would be the increase. It would generate an additional $2,060,000 for the district. The value of our mill is about $1.3 million. So that means for every mill that we go up, and I do distinguish between percentage increase and millage increase. A percentage increase means that we're applying a percentage to our current millage, and we can raise that amount, which is the equivalent to the 1.5637. Just looking at one mill, the funds that are generated from that is about $1.3 million. So that's what the value of a mill means. I do the calculations so that you can kind of do quick math if you want to play around with going up or going down and how that would impact the revenue that we would generate or the impact on the millage rate for 0.1% of an increase, what it generates and how it impacts mills. We currently have a collection rate of 97.5. That's a slight bit of a drop from what I've budgeted in the past. But one of the things that I was looking at when I was working on the revenue budget is the last couple of years, I've had some surplus money uncollected in our tax revenue line item. I wanted to smooth that down a little bit. And one of the ways that you do that is I was looking at what our collection rate was. So I brought that down a little bit so we wouldn't have a gap. Obviously, if we don't collect the taxes, those taxes do get liened, and they end up in the delinquent category at some point. But I wanted to make sure that I did not have a big gap of what was remaining at the end of the year, with my projections. The other thing I just want to note is that our overall assessment had a slight increase from 2024. So that also impacts the amount of money that we generate just on a regular basis. So if nothing happens and your overall assessment goes up, that generates even more revenue based on your millage rate. If it were to go down, it takes away from the amount of money that you're generating even before you raise taxes. So that's the information that I have for assumptions for the real estate tax revenue. Looking at real estate transfer tax over the 5-year historical trend, it has remained consistent. So we're averaging about $700,000. On our delinquents, we've been up and down on that, but it's starting to become consistently that it's under 750, which I normally budget at. So I brought that down a little bit. You'll see that on the next slide. One of our other big line items in local revenue is our earned income tax revenue. And our 5-year historical trend, if you were to look at it, and I'm just reporting this out because that's what I base it on, we had a 41% increase in our EIT revenue. So that is not an annual 41% every year. That's just looking at a span of 5 years. What has impacted that number to be so high is COVID. What has happened since COVID is that because of the staffing shortage throughout every job class, private and public, in those areas, employers have had to increase wages in order to retain employees. Also, a lot of employees have changed to work from home or are working in a hybrid. So how that has impacted Springfield Township is that there are a lot of people that live in Springfield that commuted to Philadelphia. And because when COVID happened and everything was shut down and people were working from home, because they're no longer commuting and working in Philadelphia, Springfield Township, it's recognized that the earned income tax is now Springfield Township. So there's an uptick in that. So looking on an annual basis now, we're at about a 3.5% growth, which I think is great. But it is reflective of the things that I am saying. State revenue, it always reflects the current year allocation, so that's what it's reflective of. And then I spoke about this when Mr. Jordan asked the question about funding, is that his proposed budget provided for subsidy increases, we would go up about $87,000. So that speaks to the fact that the point that we went from 0.1500 to 0.17, that the fact that we're getting $87,000 out of the proposals of his increases for education subsidies, we're still not one of those districts that are getting extra funds because of, free and reduced numbers or Title I numbers. So that 0.17 is not reflective of the question that you asked, that it would impact our funding, because that number would be a lot higher if it did. Federal revenue, our title funding also reflects 24-25 allocations. Just want to remind everybody that all ESSER funding expired September of 2024. So that is no longer in the budget. You will see that because of that, federal funding has decreased slightly. And then the last thing, and we've been talking about this from, the beginning, is that we're monitoring any possible impact of funding under the current federal administration. So we will continue to keep an eye on that and see how, if that has any impact on our budget or budgeting practices over the next couple months. So looking at this, I do a comparative of what was approved for the current year budget based upon the first look budget. So the middle column is our first look budget. We're landing at about $74.6 million. You can see the differences on the side of about $3.2 million of increases at about 4.6%. I won't go through the individual line items, but if you have any questions about what's going up, what's going down, or why things are impacting a certain way, I can most definitely speak to that before I move forward. Are there any questions on this slide?
Ms. Green, I just want to jump in for a sec and
Sure.
and highlight. We're trying to work to be responsible about this, but you can see in the last 3 lines with regard to revenue that Ms. Green and I are working to be very conservative about state and federal revenues for next year. It's been recommended strongly to school districts to anticipate reductions in federal funding, whether or not the Department of Education remains as it currently is. That we should be expecting to see those reductions. And with regard to the state budget, excuse me, as Ms. Green mentioned, the vast majority of the funding that's been allocated at the state level, which is significant, there is a significant increase in state funding allocated to public schools. The vast majority is going to the most impoverished districts in the state. And we don't begrudge them that, because they have a court case that they won to say that they are not funded fairly relative to other districts. But the net effect of that is that if you are considered to be a wealthier district, as we are getting almost nothing in additional state funding next year. So despite the other expenditures and increases in cost of goods and services, we are not going to receive significant funding, as you see there, from state and federal revenues. In addition to that, Ms. Green mentioned, and you'll see that on a slide coming up in expenditures, we have had to raise our rate of salaries and benefits in order to continue to remain competitive in the county in a staffing shortage environment. And our salaries and benefits, as you know, with recent contract settlements, they don't put us at the top of the county. They put us at the slightly above the county average. And so we want to be competitive, but responsible to the taxpayers. So just want to make sure that those sort of general pieces of information are clear for committee members.
Can I ask one question on that? So So I see the bottom three items, other state, Title I, et cetera, other federal, they're all projected to be down. But so the subsidies, the basic ed subsidy, the special ed subsidy, those are both federal subsidies as well?
8. So basic ed, special ed, PSERS and social security and others. So basically where the cutoff is where it says other, that's where the next set of funding comes in. So these are all state and this is your federal.
Okay, so the state, okay, gotcha. Thank you for that.
And the reason, if you look at on my previous slide, what I talked about him projecting as far as what our increase would be, that's not reflective here because my practice is to budget for the current allocation that we currently live in. So right now, the 25-26 basic ed and special ed subsidies are reflective of what we are currently receiving right now, not what Governor Shapiro has projected or presented and hoping to pass with that additional $87,000 that we get. That is not included in these numbers. I do that practice because if we do not receive that money, then I won't have a budget shortfall. If we do receive that money, then we have an additional $87,000 that I know in the back of my mind that we are going to get if we do get it. But I prepare for more of a worst case scenario instead of cushioning it and then having to take it away and then later going to find where we're going to cut that from or how we're going to absorb that additional money. So I always go based upon current allocations because since I've been here, and I'm not saying that it won't ever happen, but since I have been in school finance, I have not seen the allocations go backwards. They've either frozen or gone up. So I use the practice of just maintaining where we currently are and how we've currently allocated those funds instead of trying to cushion or project out or use any type of trend because state and federal funding is, I don't want to say it's to the whim of the administration that goes in, but it's based on the priority of what that administration wants to do. So if you get an administration in there that does not support public education and does not want to fund that, they could take funds away. So I never want to, have to figure out how we're going to fill the hole as opposed to just maintaining what we have.
Okay, thank you for that.
You're welcome. Any other questions on this? I think, Mr. Jordan, did you have a question?
No, not at this time. It was pretty much reiterating Mr. Franco's question. So sorry.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to talk about expenditure assumptions. And as you'll see, this first slide is talking about contractual obligations. These are obligations that we must meet. We don't have wiggle room. It's not discretionary funds. We can't, this is where we start to build the expenditure budget. And then from there, we talk about things, and you always hear us talk about needs, wants, and wishes. The needs, wants, and wishes parts is the parts that, we have to take a look at that if, we're saying, hey, you got to tighten up your buckles or your belts within your departments and within your schools. That's the area that we do it. Contractual obligations, we have basically written the check that we have to pay these bills. Those obligations make up about 89% of our expenditure budget. The biggest piece of that is salary and benefits. And as everyone is aware, that's attending today, we settled two of our major contracts, our STESPA contract and our Act 93 contract, and we are in the process of wrapping up our confidential agreement, which expires June 30th. You know that we are in year 3 of our STA contract, so all of our contracts will be settled as of June 30th, 2025, which is a very positive thing because it gives everybody security, peace of mind. It makes budgeting a whole lot easier because we know where we're headed. So this looks at STA, we're in year 3. STESPA, we're in year 1. Same with Act 93, we're in year 1. And then again, once confidentials are finished, then, and I believe that by next time that we talk or by the final budget, we will have those numbers in there. And then looking at new positions, which we don't really want to call them new positions, but I'm going to actually let Dr. Yannicone take this piece because we are doing a neutrally funded position, which is music to my ears. And I'll let Dr. Yannicone talk about this.
So because of the current challenges that we have within planning this budget, Ms. Green and I gave the message to the entire administrative team early in the fall that this would be a needs-only budget year. And that while we love to be able to address wants and wishes, we're going to concentrate on needs for this budget year with the uncertainty at the state and federal level. So as you may know, 2 years ago, we committed as a district to bringing a strings program to the district. And part of that planning was that in the third year, we would add a secondary strings teacher as the students progressed through the elementary school and early middle school. And so currently we've been able to manage the program 3 through 6. In order to continue to expand, we need a secondary teacher. And so we looked at ways that we could fund that in a neutral manner. We have 2 retirements of health and physical education teachers at the middle school. And Dr. Johnston has worked with the health and physical education department and the middle school administration to be able to adjust the schedule going into next year at the middle school across the specials areas, with the net effect being that we can adjust to having 2 rather than 3 full-time health and physical education teachers. So we're happy to have been able to work collaboratively as a team to be able to expand the strings program while maintaining the health and physical education program. In addition, we have our original goal was to not have any additional supplemental extra pay for extra responsibility positions. But I felt compelled in 3 areas, and they are a relatively small portion of the total budget. But we have hosted Relay for Life for 7 years. We have an advisor who works throughout the school year to oversee a group of students who work on that event. And so we wanted to give a nominal stipend within our contract to that event that's been going on for a long time. And then in addition, several years ago, we committed to growing a volleyball program for girls athletics at the high school. And they need a JV coach because the interest is so great that we now have more than enough students to participate both at the varsity and JV level. This past fall, we were able to utilize an unused athletics position in freshman boys soccer in order to pay a volleyball coach. But we anticipate, given current numbers in soccer at the middle school, that we may need that freshman position next year. So we want to make sure we're covered. And then wrestling, we did an analysis countywide of our ratio of wrestlers to coaches relative to the rest of the county. And we want to make sure that we're continuing to provide safe supervision based on our numbers and based on the fact that we have an interest in participating in PIAA girls wrestling, which is a newly approved sport. We need a 3rd wrestling coach. And so that's why those 3 supplemental extra pay positions have been added into the budget. And again, beyond that, we've met our goal, which is not to add any new positions this year unless they were neutrally funded. Are there any questions about the salaries, benefits, or the new positions or supplemental positions?
I would say your review on the incremental positions was really helpful, and applaud the fact that these are neutrally funded. It's well done.
Thank you.
Okay, no more questions. And I too applaud the collaboration and the time and effort and the different meetings and talks to see when we do have retirements and we do things through attrition, that if we do need to add that it doesn't add additional stress to the budget. So that is a collaboration that went across the district, across buildings, across central admin, led by Dr. Yannicone and Dr. Johnston. So that is a great practice. That's a good, strong budgeting practice so that we know that we're doing our due diligence and making sure that we're just not adding without really being thoughtful to it. So we'll move on to the other contractual obligation areas, which is our leases and rentals. That includes our all of our devices. We are on lease cycles. I work with Mr. Lutz on that, and same with the copiers. You'll see later in the slides that our 5-year copier lease is up. So we always look forward to working with the vendor to see that we have upgraded equipment. So our copiers are pretty tired right now because they've been 5 years. Everybody knows that they get a lot of usage within school districts. But the good thing too is it's an opportunity to save money as well with upgraded equipment. So that's good. You also remember that in light of the possible tariffs that were going to be implemented, that the board approved a purchase through Bloom that will be leased for our 6 through 12 Chromebook replacement. So those will go into effect July 1, but we are able to pre-purchase them now to avoid any type of price hike or a slowdown of delivery due to possible tariffs. The other big thing is that Dr. Johnston and the instructional coaches and Mr. Lutz are all working together to review all educational and operational licenses. If you remember, we transitioned to Power School with our student information system last year. So now we're looking to make sure that we are being completely efficient, utilizing all modules within that software. And we're making sure that the other licenses that we have on the educational side, we don't have any duplicative efforts. So we are doing that review as well. But those are also contractual obligations. Custodial services, security services, we are in the last year of contract for both of those. So that'll be something that Mr. Watley and Mr. Chinta will be taking a look at and bringing recommendations forward on how we're going to proceed with that. Substitute services, that was an area that actually Ms. Kerr, Dr. Yannicone and I spoke on yesterday because we also, while we want to remain competitive with our salary and benefits with substitute services to make sure that when people are utilizing their paid time off, that we have people that we're able to put in place of those teachers or those instructional aides so that we don't lose time with students or lose anything. So that's another area. And then utilities and debt service. So some of the areas that are within departmental that we wanted to highlight because these have been built in, and these are discussions that we're having. With technology, it's ongoing cybersecurity implementation and upgrades. And, knowing, even though it didn't impact us through our system, it was through Power School, going through that, we can see how important it is to have those measures in place so that we are strong and that our systems are strong. And Mr. Sneed, the addition of Mr. Sneed, who's in the background, he's never in the forefront, but he's like the wizard behind the curtain, always doing stuff. He is working with Mr. Lutz to make sure that we are doing the upgrades that we need and looking at our ongoing cybersecurity implementation. I already spoke about this 612 Chromebook replacement. For our music K-12, they use MacBooks because of the software and some of the curriculum items that they have. So those are also on leases. So those will be replaced. The number of MacBooks that we have throughout for those are very few. It's not a big number, the same as our Chromebook replacement. So we are not concerned about the tariffs and the amount of money it would be or the delay in delivery with these MacBook replacements for the K-12 music. I talked about the upgrade to the district-wide copier lease. We built in a district-wide wiring upgrade, but this is all going to be dependent upon receipt of E-rate funding. E-rate funding is a funding source that we get to give us a 50% or some type of reduction for technology upgrades and certain technology uses. There has been talk that E-rate is going to go away. So that's why I'm putting a little asterisk on this, that if E-rate goes away and we do not receive the E-rate funding, then this wiring upgrade project will need to be revamped and relooked at on how we implement this. Because right now it's based upon us receiving 50% back from the E-rate funding. And then the other initiative, I think this happened last year or maybe started the previous year, is that the central admin and the building admin, we upgraded phones. The technology department upgraded phones to Zoom phones. So Mr. Lutz is looking to finish that implementation across the district into the classrooms. So that's another project that's happening. On the facility side, we always have.
Excuse me, Doctor. I'm sorry, Ms.
No,
Green.
go.
Can I interrupt before you go to facilities?
Sure.
So the wiring upgrade is
Yes.
that are we talking about networking? We're talking about wireless. What are we referring to there?
I don't have the specifics on the project, but I do believe it's connected to networking. I know that the high school, that is a main area as far as connectivity and wireless strength. So that's what I can speak to it on. Mr. Lutz wanted to do this last year, but again, the E-rate funding wasn't there. So we deferred this project. We're going to go for it again, and then if the E-rate piece doesn't happen, like I said, we'll look at doing a phased implementation for this project. But it is to upgrade and to ensure the integrity of the wiring and to improve the networking across the district. That is my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, great.
Okay, so I skipped over facilities. I don't want to do that. Let me go back here. One second. There we go. So it's ongoing, on the facility sides, district-wide preventative maintenance. And then one of the things that I, alluded to with the bus, replacements is that we are looking to schedule a property committee meeting, sometime in April so that we can review the capital assessment plan that was conducted by Dewey, and it was led by Doug Taylor. So we've been reviewing that. We're going to do a final review, and then it creates the 5-year capital plan. And then something else out of this that has happened is that we will have a 5-year operational plan, because there are some items within that does not fall to the capital side that will be absorbed by Mr. Watley's budget. So we will prioritize that, and come up with also a 5-year operational plan, which will include things like, small items that are under, a $20,000 project. It could be a painting schedule for certain rooms within certain buildings. So that's what that will look like, and that will be coming in April. But something that hasn't happened before, because this hasn't happened before, there has not been funds built into the facilities budgets to address small projects throughout the district like this, that are specific and narrow for a 5-year. So that will be built into his budget. And then we all know that we are very excited for the kickoff of the renovations and additions project at the middle school. And we know that at our last finance meeting, we looked at a partial funding of that through another bond issuance that will, you will approve the bond parameters at the March 18th meeting. So it is causing an increase to our annual debt service, with the projection of adding on another $10 million to our existing debt. Any questions on the facilities piece?
Ms. Green, there's no other impact to the budget on the middle school project other than debt service increasing.
At this point, no.
Okay. All right, that makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, so on our expenditure side, this is what we are looking at. The slides are very similar to what the revenues look like. So we're looking at what we approved for 24-25. We're looking at our first look for 25-26. We're looking at the differences. As Dr. Yannicone alluded to this, we did finalize 3 contracts this year, so it was a heavy contract year lift. And then we had other obligations through STEA. And as she also mentioned, that one of our goals when we are settling contracts is that we are competitive at the county level. So we wanted to make sure that our contracts are reflective of that, and we have done that. So we do have an increase of about $3.1 million right now in benefits. Our PSERS went up slightly. With that, it's at 34%, but that PSERS, I don't know if anybody was here when the PSER scare happened. That was the scare before COVID that was impacting funding on school districts. And it was the amount that school districts had to contribute to PSERS to pay for the retirement. So we're at 34%. that jump is slowing down. The last few years, we've seen a decrease in that. So I think that that's a good thing. Our healthcare rates went up. We were at second look healthcare, and I believe we were at about a 11 to 12% between prescription and medical. So we had a jump there. And then, like I said, you saw the slide that showed the contractual obligations from the agreements and contracts that we have negotiated. So that's makes up all of those line items on salaries and benefits. On the school side, it's a slight decrease, and you might be wondering, why are we decreasing money from our schools? But this is the hard work of our athletic director. And he reduced his budget slightly at the school levels. I have turned into a practice at the schools that they get allocations, so their funding is pretty consistent. Outside of athletics, because on any given year with athletics, they're on uniform cycle replacements. And if you I don't know if you remember or not remember last year, football was up last year, so he had to budget for the football team getting new uniforms. So that's one of the heaviest lifts in the uniform cycle replacement. So he does not have that reflective in his budget this year. And then there were a couple other items. So he was able to take a look at things, and he was able to reduce, as was Kieran Brady at the middle school. So there's a couple of reductions there. On the department end, I just spoke to the areas that we are seeing a little bit of slight of an uptick on the department side. The facilities budget, the technology budget, and then the other budget is the human resource department budget, and that is where substitute services are housed. We want to ensure that we are, funded in that level, that we're able to maintain and continue what we need to do to be competitive with substitute rates within the county. Because as you know, getting people, it can be scarce sometimes. So we need to make sure that we are competitive with those rates. The other expenditures, you'll see at the very bottom, there's an asterisk. It shows what it includes. It's for the VOTEC tuition, legal and accounting services, board services, and the business office. So that went down slightly in that area. And I believe between board services and the business office, that's where we picked up the reduction in that a little bit. And then debt service, you're going to see this go up a little slightly higher than was presented on Jamie Doyle's presentation on what the annual debt payment would be. The first year that we get a bond in place, it kind of smooths out on what the projections are for our actual debt. So there was just a little bit from what we budgeted and thought we were anticipating. It was a little bit higher than anticipated than last year. And then I included the $550,000 that they are anticipating for our annual debt service payment based on the upcoming borrowing. For those of you that have sat through these borrowings before, Jamie and her team usually do a good job, and they come in under that. So I'm anticipating that at next look of budget, that number is not going to be as high, that's an area that we can bring down, but we have to wait and see what the market is going to look like when they close. Any questions on this?
None for me at this time. Thank you.
I'm good.
Good as well.
So we're looking at first look budget. It's a 4% tax increase with anticipated expenditures of a little over 76 million, anticipated revenues of 74.6 million, with use of fund balance of about 1.68. You know that our goal has always been to try to mitigate that. And over the last couple of years, we've been coming down. We'll have a deeper discussion when you see the budget history. One of the things that I can tell you is that this year, while I'd always love it as a goal if we could just be zero, but with settling contracts, with uncertainty in the future of funding, that is not a possibility for us to do that at this point during this budget. So I think we did our due diligence with making sure that we presented a budget that meets the needs of all of our students, that provides the resources that we need so that we don't have to cut programs. There's no programs being cut in this budget. We're continuing services for our students as we do to create the results that we have at year's end. So This slide shows, and we do this every year, we show different options for tax increases. We came in at a 4%, which is the top of the Act One index, which is where the board tells us to go, is don't go over the Act One index or come below. So I wanted to also share options that if, what it would look like or what the impact would be if we didn't go to a 4%. If we went to a 3.75% at this point, we either increase the difference or we increase the amount of money we're using from fund balance, or you guys tell us, go back to the drawing board and tighten the belt some more. Same with the 3.5%. It would be a higher increase in use of fund balance if we change nothing in the budget that was presented today. At the last two columns show what the monthly and annual impact to the average median homeowner would be in our township. Any questions here?
My only question is how much, I guess, what is the projected income that we receive from the interest on the fund balance? Because that could offset some of these costs here.
That is factored into the revenue budget.
Okay, great.
So earnings on investment are factored in as part of our revenue.
Okay. All
And
right.
that, yep, no, that's not a problem. That's a great question.
All right, great. Thank you.
Just so I'm clear, because I do like Sean's question there, is the interest benefit of the fund balance factored into revenue?
Yes,
Or it is?
yes, because here's the best way that I can try to explain this, because it gets a little tricky when you're talking about fund balance versus like revenue and expenses.
Yeah.
Fund balance, from a personal standpoint of view, is think about your checkbook. It's your paycheck, and then you take out all of the obligations that you write checks against. And I'm going old school because I'm going to checkbook. So you minus out all the checks that you write for your bills, mortgage, your car payment, insurance, all of that stuff. Your fund balance is the money that is left over after all your obligations have been paid. So think about that for on an annual basis for a school district. After all of our money is received in at the end of the year, after all of our obligations have been paid or have been addressed as to what future obligations need to be paid, like our accounts payable that we still owe people, after all that wipes out, there is going to be either a deficit or a surplus. If it is a surplus, that is your fund balance. So over the years, the surpluses that have happened in this district have accumulated the fund balance. The fund balance in essence is cash. It's leftover cash. So when we talk about what that looks like or how that is invested or what we get off of that, that is when you see the treasurer's report, and we talk about the investment and we see those investments going on term CDs, that is the fund balance cash. It's your cash flow versus saying that here's a sect of money that you see on a piece of paper that is considered our fund balance. Does that make sense at all, or did I confuse the issue?
I like the checkbook analogy. That was helpful.
Yes, so it is our cash reserves, our excess cash reserves, not necessarily revenue and expenditures. It's cash, because one of the things that people sometimes like you have to equate, and if you're not digging deep into finance or you don't understand finance, there's a difference between an asset and revenue and expenditures. Our cash is an asset. So that is different from when we're talking about revenue generation versus expenditures. And and your assets carry over from year to year.
Yep.
So when we talk about investing, that's the piece where it addresses Mr. Jordan's question. And on an annual basis, what we anticipate that we are going to earn off of investing our cash reserves is factored into our revenue budget. So hopefully, like I said, I did not convolute that question or make it a little bit more difficult or confusing, but that's the best way that I can think to answer that.
That is super helpful. And I think what would be a great follow-up is just so like if we're tapping the fund balance, which is this cash reserve, what is the benefit of the investments we've made against that cash reserve prior to this budgeting process, or expected during the budgeting process, so that if we're investing 1.6 or 1.8 or 1.9 million of that cash, did we have an offset from the investments that we made on a one-to-one basis? Like, how does that look or compare?
Understood.
It's just helpful to, because we can make the choice to say, actually, we don't want to tap the fund balance because it's a working asset for us.
Understood.
And there's a value to have cash invested and returning interest in a high interest rate environment. And maybe we would make a different choice on our fund balance investment.
Understood. I can most definitely do that. And you just made the argument on why you should maintain a healthy fund balance.
Or checkbook balance for those
Checkbook
watching
balance.
at home.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it's helpful.
Any other questions?
I just, Miss Green, you're a little modest about this, but for the board's knowledge, Ms. Green has been very aggressively monitoring our investments, and she has done extremely well in yielding financial benefit to the district out of that fund balance. And she can give the specifics of that, but she's outpacing your average yield because she's very, very attentive
Great.
to those choices. The other thing I wanted to just mention, because we've talked about this every year, so I want to make sure that we acknowledge this for the committee members. In the past, we have tried to come within a 0.5 point and a point below index. But you may notice in the prior, one of the prior slides, Ms. Green noted that we are now on a every year expected reduction in the Act 1 index. So we peaked this year at 5.3%, July 1, 2024, and every year thereafter reduces by a percentage. And so 4% coming into this year, and then it goes into the threes, it's anticipated in subsequent years. That can always change, but part of our challenge in trying to stay a point to a 0.5 point below index, and the reason why we're asking for the 4% in this first look, is that we have these multiple factors that are hitting us at the same time, and there's one more that Ms. Green will mention on the next slide. But we've had a few factors coming into play in this budget planning cycle that are unique in recent years. One is that the ESSER funding from COVID is gone. And so we've wanted to maintain our reading services and mental health services for students without impacting staffing, therefore. And that's a cost, obviously, that we've absorbed as a district. Secondly, we have seen a reduction significantly in state allocation, and we are anticipating, and it could be better than we expect. It's likely going to be worse on the federal funding. And so we've really tried to be very conservative about the potential revenue from state and federal government in trying to build this budget so that we're not caught unawares as the year progresses. And then, as Ms. Green mentioned, we've negotiated several contracts in order to maintain our competition. And as you saw in that earned income tax increase of 41%, what's been happening since COVID is every district in competition for a smaller and smaller staff, both professional, support, and substitute, is raising rates. And so in order to keep pace with our Eastern Montgomery County neighbors, we've had to do the same. And so all of these factors are coming into play concurrently, and it's making for a challenging budget plan. So while we recognize you'd like us to come in lower on tax increase options, we feel like from a responsibility standpoint, we need to come in where we are.
Thank you. Any other questions on this slide? I think we have 2 more left. So this is the budget history slide. So this shows the historical way in which budgeting has been approved and then actually landed. So I have a big asterisk on the surplus deficit line under audited, actual, that 3,017,000. And you were all, I think everybody was present for the audit presentation. So it was explained during the audit presentation, but the reason I wanted to highlight this is because when you're looking at this, that number kind of jumps out at you. And, you know, we've talked about how we were on the path to start decreasing our use on fund balance. And then bam, in 23-24, it looks like it explodes. Included in that number is the addition of the special losses for Carson Valley, and that was discussed during the 23-24 audit presentation. I can speak about that again if we need to, but I just wanted to highlight that because that is a little bit of an anomaly, and we should not hear about Carson Valley anymore. So this 23-24 audited funds and how it has impacted our fund balance and impacted our annual status of where we land. That'll just be a one-hit year. Same thing happened in the prior year, but not to the degree that because what ended up happening in the 23-24 year is that Carson Valley closed. So because it closed and then we revamped and talked to it with the auditor, regardless if we collect any additional funds, which that effort is still ongoing with those open school districts that still maintained and owed us money. So we're still having those conversations and those letters before, you know, throwing our hat in. One of the auditing practices, he says it's closed. We need to get it off our books. And we needed to recognize it and then move forward. And then in the event that we do have collections that trickle in or come in, then obviously it'll be shown as special gains instead of special losses on our annual financial audit. So it'll offset some of the write-off. But he, as an accounting practice, as an auditing recommendation, he wanted to get those off the books because it was officially closed in that year. So that's why we showed that big jump. Otherwise, we were right on point to showing what we wanted to do. But this slide I think is just important because it emphasized again where the Act 1 index is, where our tax increase are. It does show fund balance, so we're at about $20,500,000. So that would be the fund balance that we are working with. If we were to utilize fund balance to offset the revenues and the expenses. It is still a very healthy fund balance. So I just want to make sure that I put that on record and everybody is aware of that. Any questions?
I do. Much of the fund balance is already assigned to projects, I think per legal requirements. It feels like, you know, anywhere from a 1.6 million to $2 million tap on this fund balance is pretty darn close to what we would be legally able to use on the fund balance. So I just like for our next meeting, it would be really good to go through that detail of what is unallocated and able to be used discretionary.
Sure.
And then how much would be left if we do decide to tap into the fund at the levels that you've projected.
Sure. Overall, with fund balance, just so I give you just a quick without pinning down numbers, the state allows us to have 8% of our budget unassigned in fund balance. And then the rest of it has to be either assigned or committed. And normally what we do, I think I go into the range of 6 to 7% when because the auditors will come back and say, here's your total fund balance. How do you want this to be assigned, or how do you want this categorized? So I usually try to stay in the 6 to 7% of unassigned, which means that if there's any anomaly that comes up through the school year, that is the reserves that we're going to use for that. And the assigned piece usually goes to capital projects. That's where the majority of that goes. And if it's assigned, that means it's assigned for a specific purpose and you need to utilize it for that specific purpose.
Right, which is exactly what I was trying to understand. So 8% of this number, the 20,583,000, is 1.64 million.
No, that's not how we come up with what we're using for fund balance. It's the difference between, it's the gap in our revenues and expenditures.
Okay.
And then our recommendation is that we are going to fill that gap using fund balance. The fund balance allocations, you are legally allowed to unassign up to 8% of what your budget is. So I could take 8% of our expenditure budget, come up with that number, and out of the 20 million, I can classify that as unassigned.
So the 8% is on the 69 million or projected
Yes.
budget of 76 million.
Yes.
Ah,
That's what you're legally allowed to hold into assigned. If you're over that, there's a document that Dr. Yannicone signs when we submit budget every year. And
yeah,
it's a document, once I put the information into the state, it automatically generates and says what you put in unassigned fund balance, you are below the legal limit. So it'll flag you if you're above the legal limit on what you're trying to put in unassigned, and Dr. Yannicone certifies that. So that is
Yeah.
how that's calculated, and that is how you take that 20 million and you can parse it out however you want. We could put 1.6 just in unassigned and put the rest in assigned. That is the discretion of the school district.
I got you. Yeah.
Okay.
So the 8% of the total projected expenditures next year on the fully loaded budget is over $6 million.
Yes.
And we're saying we would sweep 1.6 to 2 million of that 6 million. So there's plenty of room there still on a legally unassigned dollar amount.
100%, yes.
Perfect. That's very helpful.
Okay. And we do deep dive in our next presentation. This is the presentation that Dr. Yannicone and I tag team, our budget presentation. So we will get into a deeper dive of the fund balance and some of the questions that were raised here today. That'll be addressed in the next presentation.
Awesome.
And as we always say, in April 11th is our next meeting where we're going to see proposed final. Just want to remind you all that we are looking to approve this at the first meeting, to have the final approval at the first meeting in June, to give ourselves some wiggle room in case there's any changes or anything happens that we need to pivot and have a board approval at the second meeting in June. So April 11th will be the proposed final. As I always say, this is first look that the board has seen, that the finance committee has seen. We're always going to go back and sharpen pencils and continue to monitor things and see what pivots we can do to try to bring that number that we're looking at down, either on the tax increase side or the fund balance side. So we still have our marching orders from the board that if we can come in under the top of Act 1 index, we always try to do that by going back and taking a look to see if there's anywhere else that we can cut. Like I said, I do believe that our bond financing is going to be more favorable than I budgeted for the higher possible end. So there's a couple areas that we might be able to bring those expenses down, which would then reduce what we would need to take out of fund balance. That is always our number one goal. Any questions? No? Okay, we do not have any, we do not have any action items, off of the budget. There will be the action item as long as, and I'm gonna repeat this again, that the numbers come in, within the range that we discussed here today for the buses, that you'll see that board motion on March 18th. But there's no budget board motions on the 18th out of this presentation. That'll be the April meeting that the full board will have to approve the proposed final budget. So we have some time. Okay? If there's no other questions, I will adjourn this meeting. Student reps, any questions? A lot of numbers thrown at you.
Nope, I'm good. Thank
Okay.
you.
No problem. All right, well, thank you for your time, everybody. It is 9:11, so we're gonna get this meeting adjourned because this was a very efficient meeting with an hour and 10 minutes for a first look budget presentation and discussion on bus replacements. So
Ms. Green, can I just make one comment before we close?
absolutely.
So for our board members, I just want you to know that today is the second to last day of work in Springfield Township for Ms. Jenko.
You.
And so she has done a fantastic job as our ABA. We are sorry to lose her. She is gonna do a great job. She's moving closer to her home for work. And she's got a busy couple of months ahead of her as she transitions to that new position. And we wish her the very best. She's been outstanding.
Ms. Janko, we're
Guys,
going to
for
miss you.
everything. No, thank you guys.
Congratulations, and we wish you the best.
Thank you.
I just figure I don't discuss it, so it won't happen. I'm still in denial.
No, I'm gonna miss everyone here. It's been a really great place.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thanks, Dr. Yannicone, for addressing that. That totally slipped over that. I'm in budget brain.
I know
right
you're
now.
still in denial. I'm gonna
Yeah,
just make
and
sure we
enough.
give her
Absolutely.
recognition.
But no, I want to thank Sam for everything. She, she always handled the audit. She was doing budget work. And, as much as I hate to lose her, I am wishing her the best and moving forward and building your family but still keeping your hands in the school district. So, we're here if you ever need us for anything. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for everything.
Right. All right, everybody, have a great day and thank you for your time.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.